They came to take everything from me on a morning so quiet you could hear the lake breathe. The sun was still low, stretching thin gold fingers across the water, catching the mist in a way that made it look like the world was holding its breath. I'd been fishing since dawn, just me, the ripples, and the memory of my grandfather's voice telling me that patience is the strongest kind of power. But patience only works if the other side doesn't show up with 6 board members, a title company rep, a half-dozen cameras, and an ultimatum that feels like a punch to the chest. You have 24 hours to leave the farm lake permanently, Cordelia Hartwell declared, her voice sharp enough to slice the morning air. The HOA president held a thick folder of documents high, like a conquering general showing off the terms of surrender. This is a preliminary court injunction backed by legal evidence of your trespassing. Her smile didn't just say she'd won it, said she was already rehearsing how she'd tell the story later, making me the villain and herself the hero. Behind her, 6 HOA board members nodded in perfect unison. Like well-trained soldiers, I stayed seated on my folding chair at the water's edge, rod still in hand, the tip bending lazily in the breeze. Between my boots sat a worn leather bag, its brass clasps catching the sun. Inside it wasn't lunch or fishing gear. It was something far heavier. Something Cordelia didn't even know existed. Something that could turn this standoff upside down in less than a heartbeat. But I let her talk. Sometimes letting your opponent dig the hole deeper makes the cleanup easier later. The title company representative, a jittery man named Peterson, stepped forward with his own stack of papers. He introduced himself as if his name carried the weight of the law, but the way his eyes darted between Cordelia's documents and the ground told me he already had doubts. Then came the rumble of tires on gravel, and every head turned toward the flashing lights of Sheriff Thompson's cruiser. Cordelia's smile widened. Her cavalry had arrived. Only the sheriff didn't step out like a man ready to carry out her orders. He leaned against the car door, arms folded, looking more like a tired uncle breaking up a family squabble than an enforcer. "Morning, folks," he said, adjusting his hat. "Got a call about a civil dispute." Before anyone starts yelling, "Let's make it clear this is a civil matter. Y'all take it to court. I'm not here to referee property line drama." That knocked the wind out of Cordelia's victory posture, but she recovered fast. She turned her focus back to me, pointing like I was a criminal she'd finally cornered. "You've been occupying community property illegally for months," she pressed. "We're tired of your blatant disrespect for our community standards." The way she said community standards made it sound like I'd been dumping toxic waste in the lake instead of catching bass. Her crowd chuckled and nodded. But I noticed something they didn't where they were standing. The entire HOA posse was gathered in the asphalt parking lot that served the whole neighborhood. A parking lot I knew, thanks to certain pieces of paper in my leather bag, might not belong to them at all. From across the road, old Barney Copperfield stood on his porch sipping coffee, eyes sparkling. Barney had been my grandfather's best friend and had 40 years as a court clerk under his belt. He knew land law like other men knew their own kids' birthdays. The grin he threw me across the road was the kind of grin you give when you already know how the last chapter ends. Cordelia mistook my calm for defeat. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the cameras would catch the intimacy of the moment. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. We have legal standing, community support, and resources to pursue this through every channel. This isn't going away because you're stubborn." I stood slowly, brushing off my jeans, feeling the weight of the leather bag against my leg. "Ma'am," I said, voice even, "I'd be happy to look at your evidence, but maybe you want to see mine first." A flicker passed over her face so quick you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. The flicker of doubt. She covered it with a scoff, gesturing toward Peterson. "Mr. Peterson has verified every aspect of our claim." But Peterson's eyes slid away. The cameras tried to catch my reaction, but I gave them nothing. I just patted the leather bag gently, like it was some small, private comfort, and walked toward my truck. 2 hours later, I was at my farmhouse kitchen table, the bag open, its contents spread out like pieces of an ancient puzzle. In the center lay the crown jeweler deed dated 1892. Its parchment yellowed but intact, its red wax seal still unbroken after more than a century. My great-great-grandfather's name was scrolled in looping script beside the official seal of the Federal Land Office. The grant wasn't just for the farm and lake, it covered 3 subdivisions worth of land, water rights in perpetuity, and a large rectangle of asphalt currently functioning as the neighborhood's only parking lot. The words "Senior Appropriative Water Rights" caught the light, their ink faded but firm. Back then, water rights weren't vague notions, they were lifelines, protected by law with the kind of permanence money couldn't buy. My great-great-grandfather had secured them for agriculture and domestic use, and they'd passed down through our family like heirloom silver. Except silver could be stolen, these rights. They were iron. I traced the old survey maps with my finger, the hand-drawn lines meticulous and uncompromising. No easement for the parking lot, no recorded right-of-way. Whoever built it had assumed, wrongly, that the land was free for the taking. My phone buzzed. Barney's voice rolled down the line like warm honey. "Saw the circus this morning, Ezra. You doing all right?" I told him about the deed, the maps, the water rights. He chuckled softly. Your granddad and I spent months in the courthouse making sure all that was in order. He knew this day would come, just didn't know when, or who'd be fool enough to pick this fight. We talked about Cordelia's family, how my grandfather had once loaned her father money to save his farm during a drought, never asking for repayment. Funny how gratitude works in some families, Barney said, the humor gone from his voice. Then he reminded me of one more detail. The entire residential development's water system relied on a ditch that ran straight through my land. They'd built their homes on the assumption that water would always flow. They'd never checked who owned the source. That night, I sat alone in the barn with the leather bag closed in front of me. I thought about my grandfather's words about being caretakers, not kings. He'd warned me that power could corrupt if used wrong. He'd also said, someday someone will try to take what's ours. When that day comes, you'll know what to do. I looked at the keys hanging on the wall, the ones to the gate that controlled the parking lot. I thought about 200 families, their cars, their homes, and I thought about Cordelia's smug smile fading to uncertainty. When morning came, so did Cordelia, this time with reinforcements. A woman in a tailored blazer introduced herself as Maria Santos, a licensed document examiner. Beside her, County Surveyor Tom Bradley shuffled papers. Cordelia's tone was sugar over steel. Mr. Blackwood, I hope you've had time to reconsider. We've brought in experts to settle this. Maria's gaze fell on the 1892 deed. I slid onto the hood of my truck. She leaned in, magnifying glass in hand, her lips pressing into a thin line as she examined the seal, the paper, the ink. This is authentic, she said finally, turning to the cameras. Federal homestead grant, genuine aging, period-correct materials. Then she opened Cordelia's folder, her brow furrowed. This 1953 property transfer has watermarks that didn't exist until 1987. The ink composition is wrong. This isn't mid-century, it's a modern reproduction presented as original. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Tom Bradley stepped forward, clearing his throat. My survey never supported her claims. She misrepresented my findings. The original grant extends far beyond what we thought. The sheriff's voice cut through the tension. Presenting falsified documents is a serious offense. Cordelia's posture cracked. Her voice trembled as she admitted what no one expected, that she was drowning in debt. Her husband terminally ill, foreclosure looming. She needed a resort development deal to survive. For the first time, the HOA president's armor fell away, revealing a desperate woman backed into a corner. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because the game had just shifted, and I still had pieces to move. Cordelia's confession didn't end the fight. If anything, it lit a match under the gasoline she'd been pouring for weeks. By that afternoon, her Facebook page was a storm. Hashtags like #SaveOurLake and #CommunityOverGreed climbing into the county's trending list. Local news ran her interviews, complete with slow-motion footage of kids playing on the lakeshore and elderly couples walking the path. The kind of imagery meant to make anyone opposing her look like a monster. They didn't bother to mention the forged documents. They didn't call me for a statement. In their version, I was just a stubborn landowner blocking access to a beloved public space. I watched the segment in my kitchen. The sound turned low. Cordelia's voice, confident again, told viewers I was holding the community hostage. The irony was almost too rich to taste. She thought she was setting the stage for my humiliation. She didn't realize I was building my own stage one. She'd have to stand on when the lights came up. Barney had told me once that if you're going to make a point in a fight like this, you don't make it in the courtroom, you make it in the open, where everyone can see who's holding the cards. That's why I drafted the notice. Simple, legal, impossible to spin as harassment, without looking foolish. Property, safety, inspection, notice. Parking facilities serving Lakeview subdivision will undergo mandatory safety inspection on Friday, the 15th of June, from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Vehicle access will be temporarily restricted during this period to ensure compliance with county safety codes. Property owner reserves all rights under state and federal law. Copies went up at every parking lot entrance. A few neighbors pulled them down. I replaced them. I filed one at the county clerk's office so there was an official record. I emailed the HOA board. 24 hours notice was more than generous. By law, I needed none. Friday at 4:30. The lot was already a theater. Cars lined the gravel road. Channel 7 News set up tripods. A social media team streamed live from a folding table near the curb, their phones mounted on little metal arms like surgical equipment. Neighbors gathered in clumps, their voices carrying a low, restless buzz. At the front, Cordelia was already mid-speech, holding up my notice like it was a warrant for war. This, she said into the cameras, is what we're dealing with. A man so determined to punish this community that he'll lock out hundreds of families from their own homes. Behind her, Tom Bradley, the same surveyor she'd tried to use against me, was quietly showing a small group his actual survey, pointing to the map, tracing boundaries with a blunt finger. Maria Santos was there too, and her tight smile told me she wasn't enjoying being linked to a public fraud case. Then came Patricia Wells, the legal analyst Channel 7 had brought for on-air commentary. I'd done my homework on her sharp mind, clean reputation, not the kind to be swayed by HOA politics. Jessica Martinez, the young reporter, shoved a mic toward her. "Patricia, what do you make of this so-called inspection?" Patricia didn't flinch. "Based on my research into county records, Mr. Blackwood holds legitimate senior rights that predate all other claims. The 1892 federal homestead grant is public record and would supersede later property designations." That sentence dropped into the crowd like a stone into still water. People who'd come ready to jeer were suddenly whispering. The social media live stream scrolled with comments, "Is this true? Why didn't we hear this before?" Forged docs. Cordelia pressed on, calling an emergency HOA meeting for that night. "We have to protect our neighborhood values," she told the cameras. What she didn't realize was that she'd just invited me to speak to the entire community in one place, with the media already watching. Before the meeting, Barney pulled me aside. "Son," he said, "State Water Engineer's office is sending someone tomorrow. Complaints been filed about water rights violations. That means this isn't just HOA business anymore. It's the state's business." His grin was tight. "Your grandfather would be loving this." The next day, a modest sedan rolled up the gravel road. Out stepped Judge Rebecca Whitaker from the state water court, her posture straight, her eyes taking in the lake and the development beyond it. In one sweep, with her came David Chin, a technical specialist from the state water engineer's office, and a court stenographer who immediately set up at the hood of a car. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, introducing herself with a firm handshake, "we've received complaints about potential violations of senior appropriative water rights in this area. We're here to examine the legal foundation of all claims." I opened the leather bag and laid the 1892 deed on the judge's portable table. She examined it with slow precision, running her finger along the embossed seal. "This is a senior appropriative right," she confirmed. "Federal homestead grants from this period often included comprehensive water rights for agriculture and domestic use. The language here is explicit. Your family holds priority rights that predate any other claims." David Chin had been inspecting the ditch and pipeline system while she worked. "Judge," he said, "every drop serving the residential development flows through this property under those rights. 300 homes. If these rights were restricted, it would affect the water supply for the entire subdivision." That's when Cordelia arrived with her entourage, attorney, board members, news crew in tow. Her lawyer launched into an argument about my harassment. The judge let him finish, then lifted a set of Cordelia's documents. "These have significant irregularities," she said flatly. "They appear to be falsified or substantially altered." The sheriff's radio crackled. He stepped aside, spoke into it, came back with a look I'd seen only once before on a deputy the night he had to arrest his own cousin. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of document fraud, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit property fraud." The cameras caught everything: the cuffs, the Miranda rights, the stunned faces in the crowd. But Cordelia wasn't done. She called out, voice breaking, "My husband has cancer. The medical bills. We were going to lose everything." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind moved across the lake in a long sigh. The crowd shifted, the anger softening into something like pity. That evening, alone in my barn, I found an envelope tucked into the bottom of the leather bag, my grandfather's handwriting on the front. "If you're reading this, you've won the fight. Now decide what to do with victory." Inside, his words cut straight to the bone. "Real strength isn't about winning, it's about building bridges. The land will test your character, Ezra. Choose wisely." Friday, 4:59 p.m. The parking lot was a sea of faces: neighbors, reporters, officials. National news trucks loomed at the edges. Satellite dishes pointed skyward. I walked toward the gate with the keys in my hand, feeling every pair of eyes on me. Cordelia stood at the front, pale, exhausted, her attorney beside her. "Please," she called, "don't punish them for my mistakes." I stopped at the gate. Silence fell, heavy and expectant. "I could lock this right now," I said, loud enough for every microphone to catch. "I could cut your water and the law would let me. But that's not what my grandfather taught me." I let the keys dangle in the air for a beat, the metal catching the sun. "Real power isn't what you can take. It's what you choose to give." The relief in the crowd was a living thing, rippling outward. But I wasn't finished. "From now on, this parking lot stays open, but it's maintained to county standards. Safety inspections will happen regularly. This is a privilege, not a right." Judge Whitaker stepped forward, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "Based on the evidence and the state's technical assessment, the court will issue a temporary restraining order confirming Mr. Blackwood's rights. However, he's proposed a community trust to manage these resources collectively. I support that." The murmur turned into applause. Cordelia, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks, stepped closer. "Ezra, I want to help if you'll let me." I studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's build it right this time." 6 months later, the lake looked different, not in the way the water caught the light, but in the way people treated it. Kids ran along the shoreline without looking over their shoulders. The community garden flourished beside the old barn, its neat rows of vegetables tended by the same neighbors who'd once glared at me over property lines. The trust meetings were lively but civil, decisions made with coffee cups in hand instead of lawyer letters. Cordelia, of all people, had become one of the trust's most active members, teaching free financial literacy classes in the community center. She still had debt, still had her husband's treatments to worry about, but she worked for solutions now, not schemes. Then, one morning in January, the phone rang at 3 a.m. Barney's voice was tight, urgent in a way I'd never heard. "Ezra, get down to the community center. We've got trouble, the kind you can't sleep off." I was dressed and out the door in minutes. The parking lot was already full. Cars pulled up on the grass, headlights stabbing through the cold dark. Inside, the place buzzed with a frantic energy. Over 60 people crowded around folding tables, papers spread out like a battlefield map. At the center, Cordelia stood with a tall man in a navy suit whose cufflinks probably cost more than my truck. His name was Jonathan Pierce, and he represented the Luxury Resort Corporation. He didn't waste time, "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice polished like glass. "My clients have invested significant resources into regional development plans. Your community trust, while admirable, creates legal impediments to economic activity that benefits the broader public. We are prepared to file in federal court to dissolve the trust under the Interstate Commerce Clause." Judge Whitaker was there, hair pulled back, coat thrown over what looked like pajamas. She studied the documents Pierce handed over, her frown deepening. "They're arguing that the trust restrains interstate commerce," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "If they convince a federal judge, they could use eminent domain to break it apart." The room erupted, voices overlapping, some angry, some afraid. Pierce stood calmly, letting the panic work in his favor. He thought we'd fold before the first motion was filed. That's when Cordelia stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "you left something out. Tonight, your client offered me $500,000 in cash to give you insider information about the trust's vulnerabilities and to testify against it." Her voice didn't waver. "I told them no." The gasp that went through the room felt like a rush of wind. Pierce's composure cracked just a hair, but enough to see the truth. He reached for his briefcase, but Whitaker's voice stopped, pin-cold. "Attempted bribery of a potential witness is a serious matter, counselor, and it undermines your client's position here entirely." She set the federal complaint aside. "Even if we ignored that, your legal theory is flawed. The trust was established under federal homestead law and state water statutes that explicitly protect community-based resource management. Your client's development plans would violate environmental protection laws and historic preservation acts. You'd lose before the first round." Pierce tried to recover, murmuring something about other avenues of recourse, but it was over. He gathered his papers with the stiff efficiency of a man who knew the fight was lost. When the door closed behind him, the room erupted again, but this time in celebration. People hugged, some cried. The victory felt bigger than the first one, because it hadn't come from a single person's leverage. It had come from the community standing together, even the woman who had once tried to tear it apart. Cordelia turned to me. "Ezra, I can't erase what I did, but tonight proved something. I'm not that person anymore." She didn't wait for me to answer. She just started helping Maria Santos box up the legal files, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later, when the crowd had gone and the center was quiet, I stayed behind. I took the leather bag from under my arm and set it on one of the empty tables. Inside, at the very bottom, there was one last letter from my grandfather. I'd never opened it because I thought I already knew what it would say, but tonight felt like the right time. "Ezra," it began, "if you're reading this, you've done what I hoped. You've made the land work for the people, not against them. Remember, property is just dirt and paper without the hands that care for it. Water is just water until it runs through a community that knows its worth. Build something that will outlast your lifetime, and the land will take care of the rest." I folded the letter and slipped it back into the bag. Outside, the first hint of dawn was turning the lake silver. The air was cold and clean, the kind of morning that made you feel like everything hard was worth it. Across the water, the garden, Rose lay dark under frost, waiting for spring. The ditch that carried water to 300 homes glimmered faintly in the growing light. When I started this fight, I thought it was about keeping what was mine. I was wrong. It was about learning that what you protect really was protecting you in return. Cordelia's empire had crumbled. The corporation's plans had burned out before they began, and the quiet ones, the patient ones, had won, not by locking the gate, but by keeping it open. I turned toward the barn, the leather bag under my arm, and the sound of the lake behind me like a steady heartbeat. This was never just about a deed, or a parking lot, or even water rights. It was about legacy, about leaving something better than you found it. And I knew now, beyond any doubt, that my grandfather's trust had been well placed. Sometimes you win by holding the cards, sometimes you win by putting them down.